In December of 1980, something strange happened over the forests of RAF Bentwater and Woodbridge in Suffolk, England, an event many now call the British Roswell. Multiple US Air Force personnel reported mysterious lights moving through the trees, strange craft and unexplained activity over several nights. Decades later, the Rendlesham Forest incident remains one of the most credible and debated UFO cases in history. Today's guest, Gregory Smith, was stationed at RAF Bentwaters during that time. As a young US Air Forceman, Gregory often spent time with the base's security police, and on one of those nights in December 1980, he witnessed something he still struggles to explain. More than 40 years later, he's sharing his story. So, the following is a conversation with Gregory Smith.
So I grew up in the Bay Area, California, near San Francisco. And after high school, I knew that I didn't want to go to college. I didn't like education at that time. So my dad recommended maybe look in the military. He was Navy. And so I looked in the Air Force and the Navy and decided to go in the Air Force and joined it when I was 18, fairly young. And I had a flight lieutenant from the RAF that was actually part of our basic training at the Air Force boot camp, and talked to her periodically throughout training, and really got a keen interest in England and the UK. After talking to her a few times, she said, "Oh, you might as well put in for it. You might like it, you might get it." So that's how I ended up in England. Very friendly, very professional RAF officer. And so my first assignment was in England. I got there August of 79, following boot camp and some technical training, and was assigned to the personnel flight. So we just did all the people that come into the base, go temporary duty, and eventually leave their 2 or 3 year tour. And so it was at that time that I was able to meet people on the base. And it was routine for me to go over to the security police barracks, and they called it law enforcement security police. There were 2 separate career fields, but they were all housed in this pretty huge barracks. And I went to the barracks because I just asked folks on the base, "Hey, who's got the best, for lack of better words, beer barn to have some beers after work and just kind of relax?" And they said, "Oh, you got to go to the security police barracks. They're great people." So that's how a guy from personnel hooked up with the security police. So I went there pretty routinely on Fridays, being a single young guy. And so it was about 2 years later, a little bit over a year, I guess, not quite 2 years. I can talk about the experience that we had at the barracks with the day room. So the day room was kind of like a large family room where people could go to and just talk about the Air Force, or talk about their home life and stuff. So in that area, there was a place to get beers. So it was pretty relaxing, big, large TV. And we were there that one evening, December 1980. I'm trying to remember which Friday it was, but it was one of the 2 or 3 nights that we had visitors on the base. And we were there waiting for the swing shift people to come in. They usually leave the barracks at about 2:00 in the afternoon. They start their shift at 3:00, get their weapons, and then they call it guard mount. And then they go to the respective areas on Bentwaters. They have a separate area at Woodbridge, which was the twin base at the time. And coincidentally, I was a security police augmentee. I volunteered to help out, remembering this is the Cold War, and they had a weapons storage area, plus some other places on the base where aircraft were on alert. So anyways, I volunteered, got me out of the personnel building, and was able to, if you will, rub my shoulders with the other security police personnel. It was really kind of a fraternity. And they adopted me, even though I was a personnel individual. I was still working with them. And so we did several NATO exercises during my 3 year tour. So I really liked working with the security police. And so it was just natural fit for me to be in the barracks and, strike up conversations with the guys like, "Hey, aren't you the augmentee that helps us out?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I kind of got voted into their cadre, if you will. But going back to the December 1980 event, if you will, we were in the barracks, and the security police personnel that were in there were looking at the watches, and they're basically saying that these guys are, it's 2:00 in the morning. They should have been off of guard mount, turn the weapons in, and be back here. And it's a Friday. So Friday was getting the security personnel to come back to the barracks and get their weapons back into the armory so they could go to the non-commissioned officers club or the airmen's club and have a few beers, or alternatively be in the day room. And I'm going to say probably around 2:00 in the morning, they got kind of worried and concerned. They're like, this has never happened before. We've got nobody coming back from guard mount, and the midshift people have already left for the midnight to about 8 a.m. in the morning shift. So I'm going to say between 2 or 3:00 in the morning, we're just sitting there, and I'm actually starting to fall asleep on the couch, having 2 or 3 beers over a period of probably 3 or 4 hours. So I wasn't drunk at all, just getting tired from the long day. And unbeknownst to us, the door behind us into the day room kind of busts open. And my goodness, there are 10 to 15 security police and law enforcement personnel. I think they were primarily security police. And they just were, God, what's the word I can say? Scared. And very, very directive, like yelling at us, you need to get outside the barracks right now, and you need to go to our parking lot. We had a parking lot for several different barracks, but we were pretty much almost ordered to go outside, and we didn't quite understand what to make of this. So they were obviously very startled, very scared. And we were like, okay, let's go outside. We thought, maybe it might have been a fight or something. So we exited the barracks, and there were probably about, I'd say less than 10 of us in the day room waiting for the security police to get back. And we made our way to the parking lot, and they directed us to the horizon towards Rendlesham Forest. And I got to tell you, they were talking English, but they were just so super hyped up. It was just, look over there. And so we looked over there, and it was at that point where I said, looking into the forest area. And again, we're probably a mile away from the forest, so we're not there at the incident where it occurred. But the only way I can describe it, Jimmy, is there were incredibly bright lights. And in 1980, the technology, I don't think, was quite there to have the bright lights that we have in today's technology. So what I saw were lights that were doing a grid pattern horizontally, almost like it was trying to scan the ground under the trees. And it was very deliberate. It wasn't quick in nature. It was almost as if it was planned to look at the area below the white lights. And we had asked the security personnel, like, what is that out there? And all they said was a couple of things they repeated over again was, they said, they're back. And we're like, I'm a guy from personnel. I'm like, who's back? And they said the UFOs are back. And of course, I'm like trying to figure out what they're talking about. And so we did have fellow security policemen that were off shift, and they said basically, oh crap, they're back. So they kind of informed me, told me what was going on. This was at least night number 2, possibly night number 3. I'm not certain. So we just sat there. I actually stood up, standing still, and not having any correlative comparison to what we were seeing, at least for me. When you talk about sightings of potential UFOs and you talk to people that have not ever seen that before, we call it common operating picture. There's just like no common operating picture when I related this to my family years later, or even friends. So I definitely saw something I'd never seen before. And I think what I was trying to do was I was trying to catalog it in my brain to figure out, what am I seeing? So a whole bunch of emotions and just trying to figure out what I was watching. So.
Wow. Have you seen, I interviewed Dan Tanner Isbell. He was there around at the time. I don't know if he's somebody that you might have seen at some point. I think he was a colonel. I don't know if he was a colonel at the time.
Okay.
But he had a picture made of what he saw. So he was sort of on the outskirts, and he wasn't sort of part of the incident where, Colonel Holt and the other guys, but he was a bit of a distance away, but he saw pretty much what you've described. But he had a picture made up, AI picture. If you haven't seen that, I'll share that with you. It'd be interesting to know if it kind of rings a bell. But so size wise, I mean, have you? So shape and size. Can you sort of give us a little bit more
Well,
detail on? Saw.
that's a real good question, Jimmy, because the lights were not above the tree line; they were in the tree line, which was also confusing for me. I'm thinking, what stays inside a tree line? Probably, I mean, at least 10 to 20 feet below the tree line, and that can move, or at least the light can move in between the trees. And it was December, so the deciduous trees, ones that have leaves, are all on the ground basically, so you could see clearer, obviously, than if it was during the spring or summer. But that's what another thing that kind of rocked my world was what can shift around in between these trees. So trying to make sense of what we were seeing. But the deliberate grid pattern of the lights is what really struck me the most.
Wow. Wow. What? So okay. After that, I mean, that's pretty significant. Have you seen anything like that since, in all of your years in the Air Force, since that event? Have you ever seen anything you think, okay, now 10 years later, 20 years later, that could have been or not?
No, I haven't seen anything similar to that. Although we do have some interesting lights here in Washington State at times. So, and I'm starting to look at maybe potentially what I've been seeing over past 2 winters here, but it's completely different. Those are kind of orbs that are multiple colors and kind of strange things. So I just literally got into astrophotography last week, so I'm going to try to capture some of that here, but completely different than what I'd seen in 1980.
Wow. Okay. What was it like after that? So once you'd seen that and you experienced that, and I guess these are, you're very close. You're not going out a lot to sort of family back home, so you're a fairly close knit community, I guess, with the other people on the base. What was it? What were those discussions like afterwards? So were they sort of philosophical? Were they joking?
That's a good question, Jimmy. I had a roommate, and the next morning would be a Saturday morning, and he had done an all-nighter downtown at Ipswich. So he was, for lack of better words, trashed from alcohol and all that other stuff. And so I woke up, had breakfast, and didn't really even think about it until he woke up. And I think it was probably late morning or early afternoon. He woke up, and I told him, I said, "Hey, did you hear about all the stuff that happened last night?" And he was, of course, all oblivious to it. But he, after I explained to him what I experienced or witnessed, he kind of thought I was like, okay, maybe you had too many beers over at the barracks. And I tried to explain to him, hey, no, there was like 10 to 15 cops with me out there looking at this event, if you will. So talking to him, it came up maybe once or twice after my initial discussion with my roommate. And I think he would be the person prompting it, like, like out of the blue. So you really think you saw something? I said, well, me and a whole bunch of other guys saw things. So, so that's kind of how it manifested itself. I will tell you, it was a Saturday, of course, the next day, and the base, for the most part, is not in full operations over the weekend. Obviously, security police are there. Base support functions still occur, but on Monday and Tuesday of the following week, it was eerily quiet on the base. I mean, I would walk from the barracks to my job, which was probably 2/3 of a mile each way, and I don't know, it just seemed like it kind of a hush came over the base, and then after that, going to, we call it the chow hall, where you get your food in the morning, and you hear whispers of like, "Hey, did you know that we had special visitors here?" This, and I wouldn't add to it. I was really trying to learn what other people may have been seeing themselves. So I just kind of played mum the word. I didn't know anything. And then I guess a day after that, which went into Tuesday, some people that were people like us in the chow hall were mentioning that there were special vehicles on the base that they had seen but didn't know who they were, the plates. I think what they were mentioning was they're black colored vehicles driving around, and there was some, I guess, rumor, if you will, that well, first of all, we didn't know who they were, why they were there, but they're at the wing commander's building, which was a section of the base kind of isolated to itself, and also driving around the base. So if you can imagine, and I'm trying the best I can because I was looking for these vehicles as well, And it would be something similar to like a black Chevy Suburban SUV. But these vehicles were, they were cars. If I can remember right, they weren't SUVs. They didn't have back in that day, I guess. I may have spotted one or two over the following 2 days. But again, rumor control, like, hey, there's people here we have no idea who they are. And they could have been, and we didn't know, MOD. It could have been people from the Beltway in Washington, D.C., because you don't know. It's just kind of rumor. And as soon as they were on the base, they were gone.
Wow. Wow. Okay. You how do you feel about that since? I mean, you've had a lot of time to think about it, I guess, and sort of more excuse me, more and more people have you've probably, I'm assuming, seen more and more people coming forward over the years talking about the case, and it's actually become our biggest case in the UK. I think it's fair to say it's described as the sort of British Roswell, isn't it? And it's, how do you feel about it since? I mean, seeing something that was that significant. I'm really interested in, like, because people see things in the sky, they take videos of things in the sky, but to be part of something so historic, and it really is, certainly to a lot of people. How does that feel?
Yeah, I think probably the best way is to address it in two different phases or stages. And the first phase is probably a multi-year, if not decade, of just basically saying that I have no comparative analysis of what I saw to something else. So I think I compartmentalized it and just kind of put it in my memory banks. And then I'm going to say 20, 25 years later, I was alerted to Colonel Charles Halt at the National Press Club. And then I read the little title and it said RAF Bentwaters. And I'm like, okay, wow, that's interesting. So that was the kind of rebirth of that series of incidents that occurred. And I watched really intently, and by the way, Charles Halt, I think, as I may have mentioned to you in a previous email, was a mountain climber. And I think it was our Memorial Day or maybe our Labor Day, which would be June and September respectively. We went on a hike in Wales, mountain climbing, if you will. And he was our leader. He had experience, I believe, in mountain climbing. So we were with him for 2 to 3 days, and he was quite affable. Didn't wear his rank on his shoulder, so to speak, and explained to us, hey, when we're doing mountain climbing, there's no rank here. My name is Chuck Charles, and your name is, so we had to go through that, because when you see a senior officer, it's usually yes, sir, that kind of stuff. So I knew him from that separate experience. And so when I saw him in front of the National Press Club, probably back in the 90s, I said, wow, that's our mountain climbing guide.
Wow.
Yeah. So since that time, it's kind of piqued my interest within the realm, obviously, of UAP and UFO and USOs most recently. So I've been dabbling in that a little bit, probably in the last 3 or 4 years.
Interesting. You sort of alluded to having potentially some other sightings, maybe more recently. Is that right? Are you comfortable talking?
Yeah, there's it's very interesting in the wintertime. I do have an astronomy scope. It's a manual one, so I just purchased a smart telescope. But off to I'm going to make sure I get this right, to our northwest sky. And it's only during a certain time of the evening, usually between 11 o'clock and 2 a.m. There seems to be an orb that's out there that doesn't look like the rest of the satellites, if you will, and the rest of the stars. So I have taken an interest in it. I have binoculars, I have a telescope, but they're just way too weak to zoom in on that particular item in the sky. So I'm hoping with the smart telescope that I have that I can maybe take a closer look at it. And it's quite interesting because, and call this serendipity, call this, coincidence, but that orb, and which may become very interesting to you, multispectral colors, and it's just kind of doing this, but it moves. And that's the really interesting part. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm not really trying to talk to it or connect to it. But I'm just kind of wowed by this. And again, this is completely separate. I live in Washington State. And I got to tell you, Jimmy, as God is my witness, about a month ago, I was out there and it was again doing this, and it would just subtly do this kind of slow movements. And I know this is not part of the Bentwaters briefing, but it literally went out. Like either it turned all its lights off or it was gone. And that was kind of interesting. And I came back and told my wife about this a couple days later. And I said, as far as I know, I don't think satellites do that. Don't think stars do that. But it just went blank. And it was extremely bright in the sky. So I'm curious. Maybe I'll see some more, but who knows?
Yeah. That's fascinating. I mean, that matches a lot of sightings that I hear about. That kind of intentional movement, just enough to say, "I'm interested. Look at me," kind of thing. Fascinating, really fascinating. Okay, well, look, do you since that experience at the base, and I always love asking this question of anybody that's in the military, especially the Air Force. Have you seen anything? I appreciate there's sort of classified stuff and there's things that, people are working on, governments are working on, whatever, which is secret stuff. But in terms of things that look anomalous or exotic, have you seen anything else, or are there whispers of things like that? Because I imagine that if I'd have had a sighting, going back to the 80s, and I was still in the Air Force, for example, I'd be asking people about things like, have you heard anything? Have you seen anything? Were there any more rumors about these sightings? Because we've got lots of things from different bases and lots of different cases that are coming out now. I just wondered if you'd heard anything.
Well, that's really interesting. I did talk to another friend of mine who was in New Mexico at one of the Air Force bases. And he said there are, at least according to him, he was security police as well, which is kind of interesting. And he was at Kirtland Air Force Base. And I think that's near Albuquerque. But he told me, I shared this story with him because we became really good friends over a period of years. And that's when he, on his own, said, well, I believe you because. And then he told me he was on a special guard detail at the base. Didn't really share to me what he was guarding and why he was just a cop doing his duty. And he said there are definitely strange things in the sky. I can tell you as a security police officer that you're not making this up because I've seen them firsthand. I mean, in the sky, So that's the only other, I think, discussion about it through all the years. I was never intentional to start a discussion because, there's I don't know what you call it, a little bit of tinfoil hat concerns, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that one close friend of mine was at Kirtland for, I think, almost 3 years. And he said he saw some pretty interesting stuff at night.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, that brings me on to my next question, really. And I know that the stigma was very strong back then and even till fairly recently. And there's still a bit of stigma attached to it. But things seem to be improving. Lots more people are coming forward and talking about things and being more open to actually looking into things and investigating and sort of the scientific exploration of it. How do you feel about things now in comparison to sort of back then when you see things in the press and Congress and some of the whistleblowers coming forward? Do you feel positive about where we are and where we're going, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as my wife and I just talked, if we're the most intelligent beings in this universe or universe of universes, we're in trouble, So the operating parameter starts from there. And the belief that, if you will, I believe in God, but I don't believe putting God in a silo, if you will, to say we're the only ones that were made in his image, if you will, or et cetera. So I have to kind of expand that. I've had friends actually say, how does that pair up with your religious beliefs and these entities that are out there? And the way I explain it is because of what's been going on with Congress and a lot of other YouTube channels, et cetera. I think the understanding and the ubiquitous of cameras and iPhones are becoming so much more powerful. I think the combined effect of just technology capturing these things is eventually going to lead to some kind of disclosure at some point.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's I mean, it's interesting you mentioned sort of religion and how it can it can connect. I interviewed Congressman Tim Burchett, and I actually
Oh,
met him in his office in Washington when I was there last year or year before. Real nice guy, but he's a very religious gentleman, but he has or believes there's lots of links and connections to sort of scriptures and makes complete sense to me. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I can see that there are connections there as well, and sort of stories that seem to be potentially, could be UAP, sightings and things. So I think it's fascinating. Well, it feels to me like so many things are connected, and we're slowly starting to connect the dots. Um, yeah.
yeah.
What are your thoughts now? Then, I mean, I appreciate that. It's kind of
Well,
early days in terms of people talking about things more openly, and I know Congress are doing their thing at the moment. And I know Trump's talked about releasing the files and things. Have you got a take on what's? I know it's a really, really like pinning you down on the question, and it's such a broad question. But I'm always interested to see if people have kind of gone in a direction of what they think it could represent. And I know that it can be a really complex question. It's like, well, it's really hard to answer that. But some people have gone in a direction of, look, I think that this is a mixture of, I don't know, government military technology that's being tested, as well as non-human intelligence in the form of extraterrestrials, or other people say, no, it seems to be interdimensional. Other people say it's connected to, or appears to be connected to spirits or ghosts or demons. All this, there's lots of different kind of takes on things. So I wonder if you've narrowed your opinion in a sort of direction at all.
that's a really good question. And again, these are just opinions because for obvious reasons, but yeah, I think they could be interdimensional, and quite frankly, always have been here on Earth in some way, shape, or form. And there's so many things that point to uh, centuries, if not thousands of years of petroglyphs, and that you mentioned the Bible, Ezekiel. There's so many things that, again, I'm not looking for a pattern as much as I'm looking for the plausibility that they've been here for many, many, many years, and the they, if you will, most likely not limited to one species, if you will. And as has been brought up so many times by so many people, if they were, they had a mind of trying to destroy us, they would have done that a long time ago. So as far as my limited understanding of, are they at least not interfering with world affairs? That to me appears to be very apparent. Um, so and then you start going to the theory of why different people around the world look so different from each other. Was there any? And I know this is kind of tinfoil hat touching that. Was there any gene manipulation with humans? Over the eons, that would produce such a difference in how humans look. And again, I'm not a person that dabbles with genes or anything like that at all. But so it just kind of brings up another question. I think the way I approach this is, what sounds reasonable? What's what for, at least for me, would make sense in the long run, the long term. And I'm absolutely thoroughly 100% convinced that we are not alone here. And with my experience with the Bentwaters issue, the Rendlesham Forest issue, excuse me, um, and just like the night sky here in Washington State. Um, it leads me to believe that we are certainly not alone. And the government, if you will, the United States, other governments that have interacted with other life forms, you can't keep the genie in the bottle, so to speak, because technology is ramping up so quickly around the world with, your hands, your disposal, you have some pretty good tools. I've listened to Dr. Greer, I believe, and other folks that talk about catastrophic disclosure potentially of this issue. Um, I think it's a matter of not if, it's a matter of when that disclosure is going to occur and how that will be disclosed. So, I'm convinced that we're not alone. Um, Keep it pretty simple.
I think you're spot on. I'm going in the same direction as you. I think I'm pretty much in the same place.